David.
Fantastic. All righty. Well, we will get into it. First, just to make sure, Andrew, are you hearing us clearly? We can see you. You're on the You're on the jumbotron on the screen, so everybody can see you here, but you can't see them. That must feel quite unnerving for you. But thank you very much for joining us. I know you're not too well, so it's great that you made the effort today.
Thank you.
All right.
I couldn't be there in person.
Well, what we're going to be doing, everybody, there's going to be a fascinating panel in this sense. The conversation with some super smart folks from some super awesome organizations. We're going to be talking about a topic that's not really discussed that often, as the title really suggests. But I guess sort of cutting to the chase to a certain degree, we've got greater technology available than ever before. We're in a situation where we've got new opportunities, new vendors, new options, but we have more monolithic technology in the back office than ever also, and arguably sort of culture that's more change prohibitive than change enabling in many big organizations in that sense. So why is technology change in gigantic organizations happening so slowly? Maybe if we start with you.
Yeah. I'm actually really glad to have an opportunity to talk about this. I've been at Credit Suisse now for 9 months, and part of the challenges that we face is how we make ourselves more innovative, more productive, and also deal with the fact that the cost of technology is rising. And I think really there's 2 elements which you'll hear me talk about today that really drive this. One is cloud, and the second one is developer productivity. And they're actually intrinsically related. So if you think back, 6-7 years ago, there was, programs called Cloud March. One of the statistics that companies still use is the percentage of their applications which are migrated to the cloud. And it's always struck me that there's this kind of generic kind of desire that your cloud footprint is an enabler, almost beyond the outcomes that you're trying to drive. And I think those companies which wholesale adopted the cloud and particularly became dependent on a single cloud provider have found themselves in a situation where they've realized that there's other cloud providers that they could use and they can't gain access to them because they've rebuilt their applications specific to a single cloud provider. Or more importantly, maybe there are commercial elements of scale and having a single data fabric, which has ended up to be more expensive. And so if you take a step back, why is that? And in my view, it's because cloud is an end state in the same way that any deployment end state is. And I know this sounds very technical, but the idea being that you really want to be able to think where's the best place in order to commoditize your software. It could be a single cloud provider, it could be a hybrid cloud, it could be multi-cloud, but it could also be your own data centers. And I think access to the best software is really interesting in that perspective. I'll just tell the story I was telling David earlier when we were meeting. I was at the Google Next conference in San Francisco a couple of years ago. And as a software engineer, if you said to me, why would you want to use cloud? I would say it's because you don't want to, you don't really want the cost of running your data centers. And I was really interested to see at this particular conference that I was alongside CEOs, not CTOs. And they were there because they really wanted to access the artificial intelligence software that Google provides. And it dawned on me that if I was at the AWS conference, I would probably see retailers who would want to see the product recommendations that AWS provide. And so the question really is, what outcomes are you driving? But certainly, the cost of the return on that investment for cloud for many firms where they've become committed to a single cloud provider has become much, much more prohibitive than they thought. And the second part of this is developer productivity, which we're going to talk a bit about, aren't we? But that is the fact that you really want your software change to be, aspirationally instant. You really want to be able to write a piece of code on a Monday morning and have it in production on Tuesday morning. And I think making developers more productive, giving them the tooling they need, is something which organizations typically do not invest in, and their change of software is very expensive as a result.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, that point around, if you're incentivizing organizations to put, how many applications are in the cloud is the wrong measure.
Yep.
It's actually what happens in that sense. But
Yep.
Andrew, I don't know if you want to sort of chime in on that first point of, look, why is this happening so slowly?
Well, first of all, we have taken a multi-cloud approach within that's part of our strategy to leverage all the public cloud providers for our solutioning. But I think also on the developer productivity side, the area that we've focused on is how do we leverage platforms? So how do we abstract away some of the underpinnings that developers, data scientists, et cetera, don't really need to understand. They really just want to be able to operate. So we've got several personas that we focus on. We have our software engineering persona, and our data scientist and then data analyst persona. Those are the three main that we focus on trying to drive productivity and enablement for. So on each of the different clouds, what we're establishing is these operating platforms for for the data scientist or the software engineer to be able to take advantage of the capabilities in the cloud. So the ability to self-provision an environment for them on a software engineering side in order to then we do everything as we're driving everything to as code. So policy as code and infrastructure as code, and then deploying of applications. And then doing that in a way that allows us to, if we need to migrate an application to a different cloud or a workload to a different cloud, that we can do that if we feel that's necessary. On the data scientist side, it's creating what we call our Omni AI platform, as well as our data platform, which establishes an environment for our data scientists to be able to find the data they need, get information about that data so they understand what the data is, and then how they can leverage it and appropriately leverage it and use it in creating models for that. But again, we've created a platform for them to operate in so that they don't have to understand the underpinnings, and we've abstracted away then some of the things that would tie you into a particular cloud provider.
Okay, and it's an interesting one, and there's a really interesting question that we'll sort of jump straight into from the audience on this one. Look, this is billed as a technology talk, but the question is, and you were anonymous, by the way, you didn't want to put your name to this one clearly in that sense, but beyond the tech issues, it usually is the human mindset which holds back banks when it comes to technology transformation. I mean, how much do you see cloud as a technology change, or how much do you see it as an operational change or a cultural change in the way in which a business operates? Maybe starting with you.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, because historically, the way that technology organizations work and the way that a financial services organization works are quite different. And the reason why I think this is an interesting question is because what you've heard from Andrew and what you'll hear from myself is, we're both endeavoring to try to accomplish the same things, which is really great engineering practices. When I view innovators in engineering as creating profound cultural changes for the whole firm. And that's certainly, my aspiration at Credit Suisse. I mean, Credit Suisse has been in Singapore for 50 years. It's a well-established firm here. And we have one of the biggest engineering presences in Singapore. And, those engineers, you can feel the impact they have culturally on Credit Suisse globally. You can feel how we're tackling some of the big business problems through the work they're doing, through some of the practices we're having here. And when I think about firms which have adopted technology and responded to innovations like the cloud, it's really the engineers that are driving that conversation. And firms need to be open to their voices. I mean, think about innovation. Every idea has to be heard. I know you can talk about your experiences in this, but that's the trick about innovation, is everybody's voice is worth hearing, whether it's junior or senior, or experienced or inexperienced. And with technology, and I think the way that we work, we can really teach organizations how to do that culturally. I mean, we're specifically here talking about the fact that aspirationally, when I think about Credit Suisse, we we haven't been early movers on the cloud. And I now increasingly see that as an advantage, the fact that we can really we can pick the software that we need from multi-cloud providers. But that's not really what we're talking about here, are we? We're talking about the fact that we really need to create that kind of nimbleness to take advantage very quickly of emerging technologies. And even technologies like the cloud that have been around for some time, but we've learnt lessons about how to apply them.
Maybe Andrew, coming to you on that in terms of, and maybe asking the question a slightly different way in that sense, but it's a slightly sort of bastardized Conway's law in that sense, in terms of, is the technology just a better way of getting the organization to operate in a fundamentally different way? And arguably, is that really what technology is there to do in that sense?
Well, I think it varies. You tend to think of sort of the traditional left to right process where you have a business need and you break that business need down into a set of capabilities, and then you look for the technology solution to satisfy that. And that's clearly what happens on a day-to-day basis across all companies. But then I think there's also the right to left process where new technology emerges, and it really informs on the business strategy or creates a new business opportunity that you wouldn't have been able to envision without that technology emerging and coming of age. And I think as you've just heard in some of the openings there, some of the things that are happening around tokenized assets and so forth, leveraging blockchain technology. You couldn't have done that prior to blockchain technology coming about. And so hence there, I think and there's a number of examples of this where the technology creates new opportunities and new leveraging points within the business. So that's what we look for. We have this balance that we try to drive between ensuring that we're continuing to incrementally improve and modernize our legacy platforms, as you mentioned in the first question, but then look for continually evaluate the technology landscape, and then dive into those new technologies to see how we can leverage those within the firm. And typically we establish platforms to do that so that as we add use cases or applications into that, we get the leverage of that technology platform across multiple uses. And it abstracts away some of the technology underpinnings that that aren't required for each use case to leverage, but are required for the operations to function. And our Onyx platform, which is our blockchain platform, is an example of using that new technology to create these new business opportunities that we're leveraging.
And how much, Andrew, of that is, obviously we live in an era where this isn't just about, we live in a global presence where there's obviously a lot of turmoil in that sense, but this isn't just about cost reduction or doing it better. You can do 10 times better and 10 times cheaper at the same time in that sense. So how much of the investment that you guys are making into technology is about decommissioning? It is about reduction, but it is about operational capability as well.
Yeah, we have our macro metrics that we focus on. So speed is really a top priority for us. The faster we can innovate and operate and enable our software engineers, data scientists, et cetera, then we think that's a competitive advantage to really focus on speed. So everything we do within our environment is try to reduce that friction to enable our software engineers to deliver products faster, our data scientists to deliver models and to serve models. Train and serve at a higher pace, and then we have to have the guardrails, for doing that. So we look at our other macro metrics around security and stability, and then of course, and scale. Those are all factors that we establish, in support of that ability to look for speed. And then of course, spend is a key factor, but that's typically more of an outcome that we're looking for. We're focused on how we can operate at higher pace. And then the cost saving is not so much on just an infrastructure play. How do I drive higher optimization of my infrastructure, i.e. on-prem versus cloud, and pay for what you configure versus pay for what you use. But really more the productivity that was brought up earlier of the engineers and of the data scientists, because that's what then allows the business to operate at a higher pace and at scale.
Yeah, I mean that's a super interesting point, and maybe bringing that to you, the optimizing for speed. You know,
Yep.
it sort of feels in the world we live in of the sort of complex and chaotic landscape that
Yep.
that optimizing for speed, as Andrew says, is really the only option in that way, isn't it?
Yeah.
But that has quite big connotations for risk modeling and testing processes and everything that goes around that, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the formula here for success is kind of, I think it's pretty well trodden. So one principle would be the kind of migration you have technically in firms between, from applications to platforms, platforms to services, services to APIs. And the platforms that myself and Andrew are talking about here are really the fact that you want to drive reuse. You want best-in-class, excellent, single horizontals, which provide scalable platforms, regardless of where they run, whether they're on-prem or off-prem, in order for you to be able to launch new businesses. And when we think about this for Credit Suisse, we certainly have some examples of platforms which have really helped us. As the world's second largest wealth manager, we have a multi-cross-asset execution platform which connects to 340 exchanges, which gives us, it's one of our most popular features for our clients in Asia, to be able to have that much access to exchanges. And that's a single platform that's used for our markets business, now used for our wealth management business. And if you think about that, that creates this amazing scale. Now, the trick is that that platform needs to change all the time. So it's impossible for me to think that that could be on a quarterly release cycle. Those markets are changing all the time. Our clients, want changes all the time. And so you really have to design that so that you can, this traditional process of having project managers and testers and UAT environments, all of that really, to me, feels like, not an enabler. It really feels like a blocker. And so what you have to do is, you have to invest in the way that we are in what we call developer experience, but you're really talking about the fact that you make your developers as productive as possible. You have, millions of automated tests that you can just basically do the code and release as quickly as you can. And it certainly really encourages us, and actually very much like a tech firm, that's what tech firms do. And what you don't see enough in financial services is that desire to have, that speed and agility where you need to create change. And I think, surprisingly to me, when you think about financial services, many firms are still very much stuck on quarterly release cycles. And if you think about the way the world's moving, it's impossible to think that you could be competitive like that.
Yeah, I mean, it puts so much more risk into the process by doing it in that way. Everything has to be a big change, and you have to be so certain about what you're doing, which sort of defeats the point of agile in a real sense in that way.
Yeah, so you're agile in your specifications, but not in your deployment. It needs to be it needs to be the entire way through.
Well, that's the thing. The rubber hits the road when it actually gets to the customer, doesn't it, in that sense? But we're rapidly running out of time, so I just want to sort of maybe ask one more question, which is, I mean, how much in the past this scale of change has been an option? As you say earlier on, you could delay adopting cloud to sort of see what happens, right?
Yeah.
But how much is there a risk of not acting today? Because obviously the competitive landscape with both of your organizations in all of the geos that you operate in is getting much more complex. There are more competitors. The bar of great customer experience, which ultimately is what the technology in your organizations manifests, is getting harder as well. So maybe Andrew, starting with you on that one, is this a sort of a no, not moving anymore? You have to act, and your action has to be much more significant in that sense.
Yeah, no, I think you're 100% right. I think what we've seen over the last decade and a half is the technology landscape has continued to accelerate at a pace that we had not seen previously, and that rapidity of change is something that I think we have to be in a prepared stance for. Additionally, the technology waves that are crashing into shore not only are they happening at a more rapid pace, but in many cases they're much more disruptive. And there's more disruptive waves that are hitting. You look at AI, ML. I mentioned blockchain. Cloud. Quantum computing, which is and quantum communications, which is fast approaching. I mean, these are structural change initiatives that are coming toward the shore pretty, either have hit the shore or coming pretty rapidly. So I think you have to put yourself in a position where that is your mindset, that this change and this transformation is an ongoing model, and you really need to embrace that and ensure that you're in a position to leverage it. Now, you can't just let these waves come crashing in and disrupt all your operations. So you have to strike that balance between making sure that you're experimenting and understanding the technology wave that's coming and how you can leverage it and how you can integrate it into the fabric of your operations while continuing to maintain your current systems and current operations. And I think there's things that we do, which we call as our innovation process for how we do those evaluations. We have our advanced research team that gets early on in some of these more disruptive waves, ferret those out and understand how those could be leveraged. That right side informing on left side, as far as business process and business opportunity. But then how can we leverage that internally within our tech space, and where is the best place to start piloting and leveraging and using those? So, and then of course the ever learning. You got to bring the teams along for that. We put learning sprints, build them right into our operations. So every team has learning sprints built in, so that the teams can upskill, deep skill, new skill as they go throughout the year. And that's part of our of our agile practice. And we think that really creates the environment where they can adapt faster to the new technology and changes that are happening.
Very good. Joanne, what do you think? Is this you at more risk? You can't wait anymore. You've got to step into the game in that sense.
If you think about the story we started off with cloud, you could argue that the first movers to the cloud probably should have been a bit more strategic and probably should have picked the outcomes they wanted. And so there is tremendous pressure for firms to adopt. There's tremendous pressure for us to think about the implications of Web 3.0 and these implications. But to me, it's the outcome that you want, and how these technologies can really enable your business. And this is your question about the culture, is to make sure that your innovators and your builders in engineering can describe to you how these are just enablers. Ultimately, what's happening with cloud is that they are, the software, whether it's AI at Google or product recommendations at AWS or integrated almost, data fabrics between your teams and your, unstructured data at Microsoft, that's just help you develop better product. And ultimately, what you're seeing is, and we are definitely seeing this at Credit Suisse, your engineers and your business people are becoming almost, the same person in the same roles. And that's ultimately what you want, I think.
Yeah.
To take advantage of this technology.
That's amazing. I mean, we're coming to the end, so we're going to have to wrap up. But so much of what you've heard from both of these organizations is technology is an enabler to help people do things better in that sense. And whether it's a transformation that brings about cultural change or operational change, every organization is just people in that sense. So on that note, we're going to have to wrap up, but give the panel a big round of applause.
Thanks, Andrew.